I guess we're there. Well, we're right in the middle of the Isis story. We last time talked about one chapter about how Isis and Osiris and Set and Nephthys and Horus all were born. This time I'm going to not read from the book, because what happens is when I read mystery material and when I get involved with interpretations of that, I get excited and then I start going too much into the details. So the hope is that by not going into all the detail, I won't get so excited and it will only take 4 hours instead of 6 to cover one chapter. The whole of the story, as we've seen with all of those introductions that he had, each introduction said the same thing a number of different ways and gave you an insight into a principle from a whole bunch of ways. The same is true of each chapter and of the whole story itself, and we're now at chapter 8. And the story begins by saying that Osiris the god was born and lived as a human. For Hindus or Christians, that's not too hard of an idea to take, because the Hindus have their whole idea of avatars, and we have the incarnation of the divine being in the body of Jesus. So this was old hat to the Egyptians, whose society probably goes back much further than India. India was influenced by the Atlanteans, the original Semites that migrated out of the Atlantean basins, came and left a lot of their culture behind in Egypt on their way to the Gobi land where they lived. And the Egyptians still had, or the original Atlanteans still had, memories of when the so-called divinities, the Mercurians and such, lived right among them as humans. At any rate, Osiris uses the power of the word, logos, and he uses it exoterically and he uses it esoterically, and he goes off with a band of people and he goes all over the world, and wherever he goes he tames the wild people and all the wild plants and animals and starts agriculture of all sorts and starts all sorts of culture. And he's gone for quite a number of years doing this. The number of years isn't actually given, but it's estimated usually as 28 years, or 27 in some years. And that isn't, if this is a story of initiation, that shouldn't be surprising to us either, because that's where we're all at right now. We're civilizing ourselves and we're trying to do service to the world, and we're trying to improve ourselves by making the world a better place. So the story is pretty straightforward there. While he's gone, he puts Isis in charge. And Isis keeps a firm grip on the reins of power. And she keeps a watchful eye out. And there is no hanky-pank of any kind that goes on. The words that are used, even Typhon doesn't cause any trouble while Osiris is gone. And the words that are used are called holding fast. And I think this relates to Isis as having something to do if Osiris represents more the spiritual nature, the Isis represents more or less the soul of nature, the higher soul of nature. And Typhon sort of represents the lower or animal soul of nature. even closer to the unconscious. And this is like saying that in some ways, even though Osiris is in an early stage of incarnation, it's not fully incarnated, and the wandering around represents the state when the spirit is more in the spiritual worlds with the gods, and the soul nature more or less takes care of our existence and our relation to the world. And so Osiris is in some ways setting up the conditions for the time in which spirit will actually fully come into the physical. However, when Osiris comes back from his 27-some years of wandering around, things change, because then Typhon starts his insurrection or his evolution. And this is also rather straightforward. If Typhon represents the more personal animal soul of ourselves, which defends by protecting itself, and it will attack in order to do this. And if while the spirit has not been fully engaged in the body, we allow ourselves to sink into a lot of lower thoughts, they congregate and the animal soul becomes much stronger. There's a really, really important principle, and that is once we begin to apply ourselves, the very act of bringing our energies into the world automatically brings up resistance. When we say to ourselves, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to live a certain way, this automatically produces the necessary resistance to accomplish living that way. I first learned this principle when I went to college, and it became final exam time, and it always seemed, when I had the most studying to do, that the very best movies were playing. And in fact, I even thought that there was some collusion of the movie theaters with the powers of darkness, even though I didn't believe in the powers of darkness. But I thought there was some kind of a thing, if you're paranoid and afraid that you're not going to do well in your exams and such like that, then you'll always project. And that's what I was doing. I had been bopping around all semester. When it came time to do something, I galvanized all kinds of resistance. And Typhon represents that. It needs somebody objectified in order to have resistance. And so if Osiris is more akin to spirit, where there isn't a definite spirit yet, the identity isn't really strongly developed, Typhon, in having a true separative identity, in fact excessively separative and personal, if Typhon represents that, that's the best thing to wake up the I am kind of consciousness to know who you are spiritually. This is a mystery myth, and in this myth the pretender is Typhon, who is the brother of Osiris, which is like saying that the reflection of the true spiritual self is reflected in the lower personal ego. Even our lower nature is made somewhat in the image of our higher nature, in the same way that our higher nature is made in the image of the divine spirit. So what happens when Osiris, we're really steaming along tonight. We might be out of here in an hour, I don't believe it, but we'll slow down somewhere. This paraphrasing stuff works better. I worked very hard to have a short talk tonight. Very hard. But at any rate, when Osiris comes back, Typhon takes him as an adversary and decides he can run the kingdom better. It isn't necessarily that he's evil. It's just that he feels I can do it better. That's one of the qualities of egoism or egotism. And so he needs help. And so what he does is he conjures up 72 men to help him. And he also goes south to Ethiopia, and in Ethiopia he makes a pact with Eso, the queen of Ethiopia, to help him in his plan to usurp the throne from Osiris. All right, now things are going to slow down a lot. In fact, they're going to slow down to almost a stop, because in that one little, it's just a really tiny paragraph, the conjuration of the 72 men and the allegiance with Eso, lies just an immense complex of spiritual ideas that are related to the mysteries. Egypt was a center for magic, true magic, where one changed nature, and changed nature on several levels that we aren't even fully conscious of. It's estimated that by some writers that in historical times, that is within the last 4,000 years, if you take the books of Mantheo as true history, in historical times there were at least 50-some schools of magic in Egypt. And most of them were personal or selfish magic, that is black magic, and almost all of them were gray, and there were very, very few schools of white magic. But the schools of white magic obviously were sufficient to hold the day. One open, clear truth is worth all kinds of falsity. So one of the angles of looking at the myth of Isis and Osiris, especially involving Egypt, is looking at it magically. If this is an initiatory myth, part of the work of initiation is developing magical abilities, either in the form of healing, or almost always in the form of healing, and other magical abilities in order to be able to serve. And in this case, since initiation means coming into divinity, divinity is creative, and magic is just a higher form of creation. You have tools that are better than the pencil or better than the musical instrument. You have the tool of consciousness which can actually change nature. 72 is 1/5 of a circle. The circle represents a complete cycle. It represents a completed and perfected work. That what is accomplished in the cycle. In all of the phases of the moon, there is an accomplishment in each phase. In all of the cycles of a day, where we go through a circle, there is a completion. 1/5 of a circle represents the base of a pentagon. Now, the pentagon represents magically, we're going to see more about this in just a little bit, it represents magically, in a microcosmic way, a binding of heaven to earth. It represents the physical body. In some ways, the head being the top points, the arms and legs the other points of the pentacle. The pentacle is as if we take and put a star inside of it. So, well, you go ahead and take a seat. So macrocosmically is the 6-pointed star. Microcosmically, the 5-pointed star represents a magical binding of heaven and earth. So, the conjuring of the 72 men or the 72 workers or the 72 degrees that form 1/5 of the circle represents the actual beginning of the binding work of bringing spiritual forces and bringing them into the earth so that the work here can be completed. This, I said the base because Typhon works from the bottom up. See, there is a whole aesthetic of looking at geometric figures. If a geometrical figure is resting on its base, it is earth-oriented, it is natural. It sounds rather kooky, but if it stands on its point, it's inverted. And it has its base in heaven, but from the earthly point of view, it is inverted, and it is the symbol of black magic. As nasty as Typhon seems, this is not black magic. He's using a magic to bring the spirit into the earth to use it for his own advantage, and so it's benign. And it's a positive end, even set by being an adversary, does something very positive. All right, that's the beginning of the 72 men. Now, Egypt, as part of its magical society, we've talked a little bit about magic, and now we're going to talk a little bit about alchemy. We've said it before that the name of the principal gnome in Egypt was called Chemis. All of the gnomes in Egypt were divided up in Upper and Lower Egypt, were divided up into representing all of the major constellations of the heaven, as above, so below, and the different divinities that ruled the different gnomes had a quality that brought things to a focus. Chemis was the most famous for Thoth, that is the Mercury, are the Hermes, and in Chemis, the head of the pout of gods or collection of gods was in fact Thoth. Chemis became famous for what is now called alchemy. Our word chemistry comes from chemis. Alchemy, the al is L or al in Arabic. Alchemy means the Egypt or the science of Egypt. So all of Egypt was very much involved in what later became Hermetics. In the Dark Ages all over the world and well into the Renaissance, there were alchemists. Everywhere from China to Europe, there was alchemy. I don't know how much there was in what we now call the New World, but that would be an interesting thing to be able to look into. Alchemy, as we know, is on one level, it represents the ability to take base metals, most notably lead or sand, usually both of them, and transmute the base metals into successively more refined metals until they will all become gold. The psycho-spiritual part of alchemy involved in the process of initiation taking the baser elements, that is almost the Typhon part of our character, and transmuting it into something else, and then metamorphizing or transmuting it into something else until everything in our existence, from the very stuff of our physical body, especially the essence of our physical experiences and our abilities to build new bodies life after life, to take all of that and bring it into the spirit as the potential or the activating potential for new spiritual consciousness. So a lot of this is what alchemy was from the psychospiritual point of view. Both are actually true, because one of our great acts of service is bringing consciousness to the mineral kingdom. And we do that in a lot of our chemical activities right now. Currently we're a little selfish with our chemistry and the way we treat the world. We don't think about everyone else that's evolving at the same time. And so we're a little, not very good about that. Kronos, as we said before, represented something even below or antecedent to Typhon. Kronos, as we remember, was the father of Typhon and Isis and Osiris and Horus the Elder and Nephthys. Kronos represented earth. Kronos literally means in Greek black like a crow or black like a raven. And so what Kronos represents is black earth, which is the black in the sense of opacity. We can't see through the earth. All of the other spiritual realms we can at least see through a little bit. Here we're stuck with the illusion of only the outside. Yeah, you can see through a few crystals and you can see through water and air, but to a large extent the basest of the base is opaque and we really can't see it. Ethiopia represents the land of darkness. Ethiopia it has the same root word as ether. So Ethiopia represents the land of shadows or the land of darkness, sort of a state somewhere between Kronos and Typhon, where the opaque nature of matter lives in a shadowy, etheric type of existence before the animative desire force of Typhon. Now, the queen of Ethiopia is Aso. And Aso became very famous at a later time. If you're familiar with the history of alchemy, Aso became known as Azuth. And Azuth was the magical, transformative energy in alchemy. It was through Azuth that the Philosopher's Stone was actually made. There were formulae like salt, sulfur, mercury, Azuth, which gave you the brilliant see-through Philosopher's Stone. The union with Aso then represents some kind, if Typhon represents the desire nature, Aso represents something like a proto-ether that goes through everything from the physical earth all the way to the realm of life spirit, where the so-called atoms were first originated as potentialities. And that proto-state that allows one thing to flow into another until it becomes congealed as the world as we know it is essential, as ether is essential. Each of the states of each of the metals had an essential quality to it, which was called oil. Like there was oil of gold and oil of silver and oil of quicksilver and oil of tin and oil of iron and oil of lead. And those oils were the specific essential quality of each of the states of existence that was transformed to the higher level. It was like saying if you had a little vial of the oil of gold, you had all of the essence of the gold as though it were dissolved into ether or into some fluid essence, and that you could then have that by taking it or consuming it in yourself, that you could be one with it and you could be in the spirit. And so then Aso represents the union of Typhon with Aso, represents something of the transformation from the leaden state of the dark, opaque earth into the world of desire or world of motivation through the bride Aso, or through the union with Aso. It means it's done that by taking the essential essence out of it and carrying it through. Oh my goodness. Look at this. Yeah. Well, you missed all the good stuff, but that's all right. No.
Save a pearl.
No, the really good stuff that has to do with our behavior is yet to be. So the world is not solid and opaque as we take it to be, and we find then that there is something that is essential or something that is oily about it, and if we are to become alchemists, we can form that union and draw the essence out and bring it to higher and higher states. This was called, and still is called, the Great Experiment. What is done in chemistry labs, those are experiments also, but they're extremely, extremely limited. We right now, we're trying to be Osirian do-gooders. We just are at the beginning of doing something for the world. We haven't really become journeyman magicians yet, but we intuitively understand the truth of the mystery teachings. Now what we're trying to do is do hermetic sealing. When we realize inside of ourselves that all of the principles that are in the cosmos are in us, and that we don't necessarily have to keep looking outside for philosophy. We don't have to be looking outside for guidance. Sure, we still have to relate to the material world, but when we close off the need for all sorts of other things to teach us or lead us astray or whatever, that's called hermetic sealing, when we rely completely on what is within ourselves and we do the great experiment. Because most people could say to us that we're bullshitters. You know, yes, that all sounds very nice, and it does have some intuitive rings of truth, but how can you prove this? And for most people, it means a demonstration of proof externally. For us, since we are the retort that everything is sealed in, and we're doing this distillation within our own being, the great experiment is proving it by living it ourselves. That is, when we can live out these kinds of truths and develop the magical abilities. Otherwise, this is all just fun. We come and we share ideas every other Thursday, and we think together and we say, yeah, that's great. If we could get into, churches that pat themselves on the back and say, hey, aren't we doing great or something like that, it doesn't cut much. What cuts something is when you can actually do something in the world. And so this is what the alchemy is all about. There's an interesting sideline here that maybe since all of the Hebrew, or a lot of the Hebrew lore was borrowed from Egypt during the Egyptian captivity, it's clear that the story of Moses found in a little casket along the Nile is a recreation of the story of Osiris in the casket found in the swamps along the Nile. In that same way, it's maybe Earl would like to look into this, that the union that is covered in the Song of Solomon with Solomon and the Queen of Ethiopia, Sheba, whether there isn't something quoted in that which is a retelling of this story in another way. Since you're the great Bible researcher, I figure you might want to look into that. It would also be interesting. What? Yes, she was the Queen of Ethiopia. I am dark but comely, and the world is beautiful in its way. But at any rate, there's another interesting thing. It would be interesting to see. This is also a blending of cultures, since Ethiopia has Indian wisdom from the gymnosophists. In the same way, Pythagoras left Greece and he went to colonize in Italy, in Crotona. The gymnosophists left India and they colonized in Ethiopia. And they brought along a lot of astronomical wisdom with them, as well as the mystery teachings. They had a calculus and everything. So the people of East Africa that have all of that astronomical, astrological knowledge that they have, even the primitive tribes, were probably influenced by the gymnosophists from India. And that is an east meets west kind of stream, because the Egyptians had a lot of the Atlantean wisdom from when people were going east out of Atlantis and then coming back with the Indo-European knowledge from the other direction. It would be really interesting to see how that all fit together in the society. All right. Egypt, as we know, we've talked about Egypt now as having been a society of magic, and Egypt as having been a society of alchemy. It was also a civilization where we ended last time. We're going to go back to that again. It was a civilization of mathematics. We talked last time about Typhon kicking his way out of his mother's womb right through the side. He kicked his way out, probably on the right side where the desireful liver is located. He kicked his way through the ribs. We said that had something to do with the extremely radical nature of the isosceles right triangle. Well, we're going to go back to that information now. We're going to look at it in a slightly different way. Oh boy, let's take all of it off and fill it all up again. In fact, I could take everything off tonight because we're moving into a whole new subsection in the astrology class. In the three-dimensional worlds, there are only five perfect geometric solids where every face is equilateral and every face is identical. They are the tetrahedron, the cube, the octahedron, the dodecahedron, and the icosahedron. All of everything in the cosmos, on all levels of the cosmos, can be related back to one of these figures or the interrelation between these figures. Everything, anything you can think of in human culture, can be related back to the geometric figures. There are three different types of regular figures that polyhedra that form the faces. The equilateral triangle is found on the tetrahedron, the octahedron, and the icosahedron. The square is found on the face of the cube, and the pentagon is found on the face of the dodecahedron. Each of these represents a state. They represent a state of perfection in the cosmos. The equilateral triangle represents the state of perfection in spirit. The square represents the state of perfection in matter. And the equilateral pentagon represents the state of perfection in soul. My goodness, even more people who have missed even more. There are 3 triangles that produce these 3 regular triangles. They are the isosceles right, the 1, 1, square root of 2. There is the 30, 60, 90, which is the 1, 2, square root of 3. And there is the 1, 2, square root of 5 triangle. These triangles are called semicircular triangles because they fit into a semicircle. And they are considered triangles of construction because they are used to build they're used to build the perfect figures. You can't build these figures without explicitly or implicitly producing these 3 triangles. The semicircle, if the circle represents a complete creative work, a circle divided horizontally with a diameter, the upper part obviously represents spirit, the lower part represents matter. A semicircular triangle that where both ends touch the diameter, which is, they all have to be right triangles, the semicircle represents an arc. It represents an incomplete creation, and it represents a reflection. So what we're talking about in the semicircle is incomplete perfection. We're looking at reflective perfection or becoming perfection, and it's in a state of building. So these triangles build these figures, which in turn then build the regular polyhedra, which are the basis of everything in the cosmos. Now, in spiritual matters, in the Egyptians and in the Greeks especially, these 2 societies, it's even in Hindu things, but it's not so wide open in the symbolism as it is in Egypt and in Greece. The process of geometrical constructions and the numerical or arithmetic counterparts were represented changes in consciousness that were necessary to become spiritually. The whole idea was that when the spirit in abstract understood something in its pure idea form, what it could then do is apply it on each of the planes as necessary. So that going through a course in geometry was going through a course in spiritual work. So that a person, obviously the different propositions of geometry, you've got theorem such and such, and it may take you quite a few years to be able to accomplish that. Like finding a center spot in a circle or producing a circle is what they do in eurythmy. They do it as long as it takes to find the center so that the people can relate to each other as a full circle. which is the same thing as if you've ever read the works of Carlos Castaneda. The first thing that Carlos Castaneda had to do was to find his spot where he was supposed to sit. He had to find his center. The character of the equilateral triangle and of the 30-60-90, which produces the equilateral triangle, relate to perfection and ease of accomplishment. My way is easy, as Christ says. The things that are done in the Spirit are done as though nothing is done, and yet everything is accomplished. The things that are in the isosceles right triangle and in the square, and eventually the cube, represent construction, the imperfect. They represent the struggle. No matter where you go, you can't find a nice point on the square. So they represent construction. The 1/2 square root of 5 and the pentagon relate to abstraction, assimilation, and analogization. We're going to come to that in just a little bit. Now, in the construction of the square and of the equilateral triangle, the construction is very direct, and it's very explicit, in that an equilateral triangle is two 30-60-90s, and a square is two isosceles right triangles. You cannot do that with the pentagon. It is a much more subtle or implicit. To get from 1/2 square root of 5 to a pentagon, you have to do an invisible step in between. And that invisible step is to take a line segment and divide it means and extreme. And to divide a line segment means and extreme means that A is to C, AC is to CB, AC is to CB as CB, I think these are the symbols, are to AC. AB, yeah. Yes. This is called a golden section. And the relationship of this segment to this segment is identical to the relationship of this segment to the whole thing. Mathematically, this is called the Fibonacci series in arithmetic, and this is what is behind the whole growth cycle and the spiral of growth rate and such like that. It's called all of the art, for example, in the Renaissance that was done by people who were involved with the mysteries, that the frames of the art itself were that this was AC and AB. And the proportionation of the bodies and such was of that same proportionation. But the whole point is that the golden section represents what the soul nature, or what the pentagon what that stands for. The AC is to CB as CB is to AB is the perfect relationship of the principle of analogy. It's called the Hermetic axiom. As above, so below, what has gone before in heaven will follow after on earth. Know this and rejoice. The ability to analogize, or to divide the consciousness according to a perfect analogy, is how the unity of the divine is maintained all of the way into manifestations of nature. that is the oneness of God is replicated, in the same, like when we say, I can still remember it in grade school when I said, an atom is like a solar system. That's the principle of analogy. And there is something that is parallel on all the levels of existence, and that the vertical whole running through that represents the unity of consciousness maintained on parallel planes as it goes more and more into differentiation. There is a principle that works for each of the planes of existence, and that's the principle of cause and consequence. There are opposites, whether you take color wheels or whether you take seesaws. There are opposites that balance each other out. And on each level of existence, it's a causal realm unto itself, but each level is parallel to each other level. And the thing that maintains the unity of consciousness so that one does not get lost from plane to plane to plane is analogy. And that's what we're trying to get at. So what we're saying is that when the conjuration of Typhon took 72 men and the alliance with Aso represents that vertical that runs through the planes. The 72 men producing the base of a pentagon represents a binding through analogy, or through an undertone type of quality. So the fundamental polyhedra are harmonized then, and they're united in one more triangle. And that is it's actually a family. This is 3, this is 4, this is 5, this is a triangle, this is a cube, this is we don't have enough room, but that's the pentagon. And so in this, the 3 is always the vertical. It is the abrupt spirit where it maintains itself. The 4 is always laying down or couching down in some pictures, but it represents matter, which is the receptive force where the building takes place. And the androgyne, that is, this is male, this is female. The 5 side is the androgyne, male-female, and it represents the child, the male-female child of spirit and matter, which is the soul. So we have a picture of that. If we've looked at it before in some of these things, it happens to be the 42nd proposition of Euclid in Euclid's geometry, which was the hard one that stumped many people in order to be able to, we'll just pass it around. So the 3, 4, 5 triangle, I think that it's actually the next one in the family is the 4, 7, 4, 7, 12, isn't it? No. Well, we can do it 16 and 49, 5, 65. No, it isn't 4. Oh, it's 4, 5, I bet, huh? 16 and 25, 41. Well, I forget what the family is. Do I have them written? I thought I wrote them down here somewhere. 4, 7, 8. 7 and 7, 49 and 16. Yeah, 64. 4, 7, 8, and the next one is 5, 12. Is it really? Oh, maybe there isn't one in there. I'll have to check it out. There's a formula for how the whole family goes up, but it's not germane to what we're talking about now. So, all of these things, to give an example, and it's a very important example, in music, the 1, 2 square root of 3, that is the 30, 60, 90, relates to the major chord. And you put 2 of them together, and you get the perfect trine, which is the augmented chord. If you take the 1, 2 1 square root of 2, that's the minor chord, the sad, the harsh building quality. You put two of them together and you get the really painful, the diminished chord. The 1, 2 square root of 5 is not really a chord, but it is the way all of the chords are bound together. It has to do with the law of fifths, the way things are attuned. So even in music, like all of the, like if you try to attune to adjacent notes, by the time you get to an octave, you'll be off. But if you take and tune to fifths, you'll come out with a reasonably perfect tuning. And that's sort of like so this is the happy side, this is the sad side, and this is the fudge factor of tuning, which is the way, the way you climb the scale. The way you climb the scale is by the principle of analogy. Now, what we're saying in all of this is that the principle of analogy is to assimilate. That is, you see how one plane is similar to another, and in consciousness you can transform or metamorphize something from one plane to existence to another plane of existence. This is an attunement, or it's sometimes called an assimilation of consciousness, where you assimilate your consciousness with a state of being and you raise yourself to that level. This was the thing that was done in the mystery schools to initiate one. One assimilated one's consciousness with a higher principle by living out a myth. Exactly one of the myths that was lived out was the myth of Isis and Osiris. And in this Acer principle, associated with the 72, indicates that there is not only a perfect proportion to the body, but there is an attunement factor between the different levels of existence, that by assimilating our consciousness or attuning ourselves to the different levels, we can make the transformations in ourselves, and we can prove it to ourselves by making the transformations or the transmutations in nature itself, to raise things to the different levels. So it's not far-fetched when Pythagoras says that the whole process of enlightenment is a process of tuning your whole vehicle so that you are in a perfect or in a just proportion within yourself. You get a perfect understanding. Or when somebody says that if you want to see a certain realm of the desire world, you attune yourself to that. If it's a green realm, so to speak, you attune yourself to the frequency of green, and you assimilate your consciousness so that the green within you is attuned to that. So the whole process then of hermetic sealing and of spiritual becoming can be shown mathematically, and it can be shown alchemically by the oil of Aesol or the oil of Azuth that we talked about, and we can see that it is a magical property, that what was done was a conjuring of words. The Egyptians, all through everything they do, talked about tone power. They were talking about the voice of the word, but they were also talking about the whole body being the whole being as being a resonant instrument, in that by actually raising ourselves or lowering ourselves to various pitches, we become in the cosmos. So, all of these things seem far-fetched, and if you look at it, if you go into your deepest prayers, you find yourself pitching to a much different level. It's something that's very experiential. When you get to a different level, your consciousness is different, and it feels, like everything feels like it's very, at the same time that it's peaceful, everything feels vibrant at the same time. All right, back to the story here. We won't get out of here in 90 minutes. What happens is that Typhon secretly takes the exact measurements of Osiris, and he builds an ark exactly to the size of Osiris, and he puts all sorts of beautiful ornaments on it, and he brings it into a banquet hall when all the gods and goddesses are drinking together. And that's worth another hour right there. This is all multi-coded. Very, very multi-coded. Part of it we've already seen last time. In physical terms, there's only one way you could get the exact measurements of Osiris would be when he's asleep. And that gives us the whole principle we dealt with last time, that by reflective projection, the spirit has projected part of itself into the different realms of matter, and that part is unconscious yet. It isn't fully inhabited by spirit, and that unconscious part, or relatively unconscious part, is like sleeping. So it's the same kind of secrecy or hidden measurement that when Kronos and Rhea slept together and all of the gods and goddesses were born from that union, that union was in secret, meaning to say it wasn't all completely self-conscious. In one way, then, Typhon represents the world soul, or the animating soul of the world, and it's like saying the animating soul of the world, Typhon, can take measure of the world. This comes to a really important principle, and that is the world as we see it is the exact measure of God. The world as we see it is the exact measure of God. And that is dependent on another principle, the way the divine works. The divine works all out. It doesn't stint anywhere. If we're doing a visualization, concentrating and trying to hold an image in our consciousness so that it stays stable, our span of attention and our ability to condense an image, very few people. I've met people who could move objects, but I've yet to see a person who can materialize an object so that someone else can see it. But the span of attention of most of us is very limited, and we can form shadowy images and we can maybe hold them for a few seconds. But to hold it for a long time, that is the measure of our concentrated creative consciousness, our individual. The world, as we see it now, represents the limit of the concentrated creative consciousness of God. That this is God's creation. God doesn't go overboard and then sort of overdo and then collapse into a black hole, at least until it's time to do that. God doesn't do that. But God gives full measure of its being at all times. And that is a really important principle. If we want to know ourselves and if we want to emulate the divine, if we can be concentrated and give ourselves fully at all times, we are then living in the image of God. So it's the exact measure of the divine. And so then if nature, even physical nature as we see it now, the black earth with all of its opacity, the realm of Kronos, the dark lead, if that, that's beautiful. It's very beautiful. And it is both beautiful so that all the gods admire it. It's radiant with the spirit that is behind it. But it is also because there is unconsciousness in it, and there's unconsciousness in both ways. We as creatures don't understand the consciousness of God that is in nature, and God doesn't understand the unknown that is becoming in nature. So there is ignorance both ways, and wherever there is ignorance or partial consciousness, forms then have the quality of a symbol. And so the ark in which Osiris is eventually going to step has got symbols all over the outside of it. It's beautiful, and it's really, it's a thing to behold. All right. Now, we haven't talked much about this as a bi-level myth, and I'm starting to panic because I know I'm going to have to talk really fast to say what I want to say. This is both a myth of the manifestation of spirit into nature in the creative act that we call the creation, and it is a myth of initiation. We haven't talked a whole lot yet about it as a myth of initiation. This beginning of the initiation of Osiris, which is the death of Osiris, because all those books of the dead are really books of initiation. They're not books about dying. They're books about the little death when you leave the body. Initiations take place at special times. When did this one take place? It took place in the banquet hall when the gods were drinking together. This is quoted. We all know where the banquet hall is, right? There's the banquet hall. It's the 10th house. It's at the vertical. And if you line it up on the cosmic mandala, that's either the 10th house, or it's Capricorn, or it's sidereal Capricorn. It's at the top of the spiritual vertical. And the conjunction is everybody coming together to drink. They're at the same pool. They're at the same place. This is really beautifully. G.R.S. Mead gives some wonderful hints here if you want to, but he doesn't go into all of this, unfortunately. He could probably do a better job of it. But when it says that the gods and goddesses were all drinking together in the banquet hall, that's exactly the same thing as the section in the Bhagavad Gita that relates the two most holy times of the year. They relate one to smoke, midnight, midwinter, and so on up the line. That would be the Capricorn side. The other they relate to light and fire and midsummer, and it's right in the center of the Bhagavad Gita. You know the section that I'm talking about? No. Yeah, it's talking about the two holy times. Well, it makes one sound terribly unholy. It makes the smoke and the darkness and all of that sound unholy. So what we're doing is saying that there is some kind of conjunction that occurs at midsummer or at midwinter in one sense of it all. We're going to look at it in a much bigger sense in just a second. There's a lot. So we're talking then about the relationship of spirit to matter at very different times. At midwinter, at Capricorn time, in the banquet time, from the human point of view, form is kaput. There's not much that's living. You know, you're out in it too long and you freeze to death. But spiritual life is its strongest. So the divine is strongest at midwinter, while the material is weakest at midwinter. Midsummer, it's just the other way around. The form, everything, it's summertime and the living is easy. That everything is pleasant and everything is abundant with growth. And you're outward. You're like the people of California. You can be outside all the time. Why develop spiritually if you can lay back and be outside and all of that. So, what we're talking about now is an arc of time as much as an arc of consciousness. Boy, how am I going to do all these reversals? The physical arc in which would fit the Ark of the Covenant, which would fit into perfectly into the sarcophagus, as it's called, in the king's chamber. When the initiate laid in that sarcophagus at midwinter, he was taken out of his body. And it's that pull of coming into the body by the gods, and the coming out of the body as humans seeking initiation that we're talking about. And this is what is sometimes called the mystery of the southern and northern gates. This is a very big topic, and we're going to breeze through just a little bit of it. There is, from the human point of view, humans enter through the northern gate. We enter through the womb of Cancer. And we exit when the Grim Reaper, Saturn, takes us out at the end of life. The gods, at the other hand, come down from the heaven worlds, and they go out through Cancer. For the gods, they come in with the objectivity of Capricorn and the patriarchy, where they rule us completely by destiny. And when they leave us behind, and they become more or less the subjective forces behind nature, and we act on our own. So the way the gods come into the world and leave it, and the way we come into the world helpless, and we leave as objective powers, all of that is symbolized in the northern and southern gates. It also goes to a whole period of time. We are now in the densest part of matter. When the equinox precessed to this point, approximately 10,000 years ago, was when the last flood of Atlantis was. It's recorded by Plato and Solon and a number of people like that. There were three Atlantean floods, and the most hardened material period is when the equinox is precessing through these signs, and Nostradamus claims that the whole world dissolves back into the ethers. You know, what does it say in the Bible? No more water, but a fire next time. You've heard the folk song that goes that way. That in the year, approximately the year 7000, is when the equinox is at the southern gates. Then we would exit into the realm of fire, being Sagittarius. And so what we're talking about is a grand incarnation of all of humanity coming into the deepest material state in Cancer and going out in Capricorn. We're talking about the individual human coming into birth through the Cancerian womb and leaving out through the objective state when there's nothing left but a hardened skeleton and everything is arthritis. I'm beginning to notice that already. So the Ark, now I'm trying to say a whole bunch of things. The Ark of the Covenant, the promise that we wouldn't be destroyed by a flood next time, that Ark of the Covenant is also an arc of time. When the forms had to be withdrawn to a higher plane and then brought back in because of the flood. This is something that takes place repeatedly in evolution, which is another form of transmutation. All of the evolution, we go to different states of consciousness, different states of materiality, and always we are taking the essence of our experience from one state and bringing it to another. And as we do that, those experiences unfold and awaken in us all of the things that we can become. So the Ark of the Covenant is this arc of time between the northern and southern gates. It's also the ark of promise that we have, that we won't be destroyed in that time, and it's also the ark of time in which we can be initiated in the ark in the physical sense. All of the sacraments in Christianity relate to this. When we came out of the Atlantean waters, that's baptism. Marriage is when we begin the union with the higher self, and extreme unction is when we leave at death, when we meet the angel of death and we are nothing but a skeleton. So when we take communion, we drink the first communion, or the first drinking took place at the wedding, which is, that the marriage, and it is drinking that consciousness. But we should get back to the story. We're almost done for the night. I'm having a hard time pulling it all together because, again, I've opened up too much. But the vertical pole that along which we rise and fall using the principle of analogy is the northern and southern gates. If we want to get the flavor, the spiritual flavor, by looking at the signs of the zodiac and the houses that go with them, we get the idea of the tasks that are before us in the different ages as we're going through this period, and the transmutations we need to make to even be human beings that keep up with the tide of evolution that we are in, and if we want to anticipate future developments so that we can move ahead in the initiate state of consciousness. So what I'm trying to say is that through analogy and through the principle of the northern and southern gates in the astrological mandala, we can replicate in our own being what those states of consciousness are. We do it all the time. Every time we're trying to produce healing energy, we're trying to go right back to that primordial source of that proto-ether, and we're trying to produce a healing oil or an alchemical oil that would be like the Aso or the Asuth. All of these things work together. Anyway, back at the story, the gods and goddesses, when they see this beautiful ark, it's just a thing of wonder, and they're all just agog at the thing. And Typhon sportingly says, "Whoever fits into it perfectly can have it." And they think this is a great gesture on his part. And of course even the gods are subject to the fascinating illusion of matter. This is absolutely necessary. The illusion, we have to be allured to matter. If we're going to realize the dream, we have to come into the dream. And we have to see that it's beautiful. Even the gods that precipitated the dream. All of the gods unconsciously precipitated what is this casket that we call nature. And the only thing that I know that is repeated 5 times in the Bible, now Earl's going to shoot me down on this, the only thing that I know that is repeated 5 times in the Bible is in the creation. When after each stage of the creation, the gods look back and they say, "It is good." And when the gods are saying it is good, there's a very deep principle of nature, of creation, that I don't want to go into now because it would be too long. You're going to go to Minneapolis later next month. I'm going to be talking exclusively about that. But it is a principle that what takes an idea and brings it into external conscious manifestation is the appreciation of it and letting it stand for itself by saying it's beautiful. And the gods do that very thing. It's not just meant to be a pretty sing-song repetition in the Bible. When the Bible repeats something 5 times, it means something serious, something big is there. So that each thing that is accomplished is saying, wow, that is beautiful. And that's what gives it its independent life. And so that's great. That illusion, if we want to call it that, the illusion is not our creation. We're not vainly looking in a mirror. The illusion that is so enamoring, that looks so beautiful, is the unknown. We have projected this dream into matter, but it is the unknown that we really want. That is that draws our curiosity, and it looks so beautiful and it looks so fetching to us, the woman that leads us into the dark woods or something like that. It is Goethe's eternal feminine that is always leading us on, and it's always leading us in. This is again the manifest version of the Dark Madonna that we talked about a few weeks ago. So one by one, all of the gods and goddesses try to step into the casket. And all of them fail until at the very end, the last shall be first. Osiris fits in, and it fits perfectly. Now there are again some really important principles. We should only take one principle on night, but I never get everything said I want to say, so I get greedy. One of those principles is when you're reading this, and this is a story that was told every year. This was celebrated every year as a major celebration for the people of Egypt. They knew what was coming. And it's like a fairy tale. You read it again and again. You know what's going to happen to Osiris when he steps in the box. You know he's doomed at that point. And when Osiris walks up to the box, you find yourself inwardly saying, "Don't do it! Don't do it!" Do you know there are whole philosophies that say, "Don't do it"? Their whole philosophy is dedicated to saying, matter is illusionary. Don't get in it. But that is spiritual suicide. If we don't step into our dreams, we can't realize them. If we don't step into our casket, we can't float out to sea. We can't, we doom ourselves to a kind of spiritual death. We wither away in fantasy. If we keep things in a dream state and don't bring something into reality, we can't get anything out of it. We can't become creative beings, and we sort of become like schizophrenics, spiritual schizophrenics. We withdraw. And when it comes our time to step in the casket, we withdraw. So I'm not getting in that. I know what's coming if I get into that. We withdraw and we say, no, I don't want that. And if we withdraw, then we live in a dream. We say, isn't it beautiful? It's perfect. It's much more perfect than if I stepped in that box. But that if we don't step in the box, you're not going to realize the dream. So you have to step in and do it. The second important spiritual principle is that one person, one box. Only Osiris fits perfectly. We can't live in somebody else's dream. We can share a dream together, but we can't live in somebody else's dream. Our dream is an externalization of what we are. And when we externalize that and then step into it, it's also what we could become, if that is how we, in fact, do become. That's really a nice way to think of our bodies as dreams. The Platonists really thought that the bodies were sarcophagi, and some of the more severe Buddhists consider it excrement. All of them are true points of view, depending, as long as you keep it all together. The other thing is that it is tailor-made. It's not made for somebody else to enter our body. It's all of these manias about channeling and all of that stuff, that no one else can really, truly enter into and get out of our body exactly what it was meant for us to get out, for we as individuals to get out of it. And so this is why the box has to fit perfectly. This is why it did, because it was, this is the exact representation of Osiris. So Osiris does step into the box. And when he does, the 72 dash up, they slam the lid down, they close the fasteners, and they pour hot lead all over it. They carry it out to the Nile, and it floats down the Nile, and it goes out to the sea at the what is called the Tannitic mouth of the Nile. Okay. When Osiris steps in the box, this is really commitment. Well, how is it? Well, you know what that famous joke is? What's the difference between ham and eggs in breakfast? Eggs are a contribution, and ham is a real commitment. When Osiris steps into the box, it's real commitment. And he is in fact living by his word, living out his word, and he is living in his word. The 72 represent like an oath. They represent like an oath of living out. This is the binding again that produces the magical connection to the earth. The 72 can also be seen a number of ways. They can also be seen as those who witness at the very beginning of our cycle when we come to birth. There are always positive witnesses because there's hesitation at that point. To be or not to be. Do I want to go into the cycle again? And at initiation or at the little death, there are silent witnesses that watch it. But at any rate, there is something that is positively confirming about the action. The clasps, you know how clasps work, you put them up and pull down, and from the inside you can't move it anymore. And that represents the nature of incarnation. That represents the nature of progress. That represents the nature of commitment. Once you have done something, once you have had an experience and put yourself into an experience, you can't go back. We can't go back and say, I don't want to be trying to live a spiritual life anymore. There's no way we can possibly do that. And once we've experienced something, we can't say, no, that doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. When you experience, you know it is so. Progress is a one-way street. Even if it seems like there are little regressions and other perturbations along the way, it really is a one-way street. When we know something, we know it, and we go forward. The lead brings us again back to the alchemy. It makes the whole casket, the casket of Bassiano, if you remember the Midsummer Night's, the Merchant of Venice. He chooses, in order to win the bride, he chooses the casket of lead, because he realizes gold is already finished and silver is almost finished. He says, give me humble lead. That's where the future is. He's wise enough to know that in the unpretentious, there's the most potential in the common kind of earth. So this clearly relates to a period where things are going from lead to iron in an alchemical state. The iron, the red iron, is represented by red-haired Typhon, and the changing agent is represented by Aso, and all such like that. The lead also represents the stifling agent. In terms of radiation, lead is a blocker for almost all forms of electromagnetic radiation. It used to be a form of nature magic. It wasn't even magic. It was more like technology. That when Roman emperors wanted to undo someone, they built them a house and they lined the house with lead so that they were deprived of the natural radiations that they needed. Also, this represents like what our state is like in matter. We're shut off. We're shut off from the spiritual worlds. We're living in a leaden casket. Fortunately, we're beginning to see that there's something on the other side of the lead, but we're still there yet. The Nile, of course, we've talked about that a number of times. The Nile represents, in the caduceus of Mercury, it represents the stream that goes down the middle. The Nile is the stream that is the vertical that goes from the southern gates to the northern gates. And if you go one way, if you go downstream, you become human, which is exactly what happens to Osiris and what happens to the gods. So from the macrocosmic divine point of view, going down the Nile means going into the human state in material existence. For the human initiate, we swim upstream. We go against the tide. We don't go with the flow of nature. We don't let our natural instincts rule us. We try to work by something within ourselves, because when you swim upstream, you become a god. We've talked about that already, so we don't have to say a whole lot. We've also spoken of this as the whole story. We'll just mention it briefly. The whole story can be represented by the passage of germs of spiritual energy passing down and then volitionally being brought back up the spine. It's another way of looking at the way. The tenetic mouth of the Nile brings out one of the last few principles that we have to work on. The sea, to the ancients, to the Greeks and the Egyptians, the sea represented chaos. And again, looking at it on a bi-level, there are two different types of chaos. When we swim upstream and leave our body, we enter into spiritual chaos. The first time you have an otherworld experience, it's clear, it's very clear, but at the same time, it's stupendously chaotic. Because there's so much going on that we're blessed by having a limited leaden consciousness living in this world, because it takes a long time to adjust. The tenetic is short for Titanic. And one of the nicknames in the mysteries for the Titans were the stretchers. So from the human point of view, when one gets to the tenetic mouth of the Nile, the consciousness is stretched. Your whole body or your whole being feels like it's being pulled everywhere all at the same time, because you're related to the entire cosmos, and you see what is your little personality is actually a condensation of things that have come from the far reaches of the cosmos. So the tenetic mouth of the Nile means the stretchers from that point of view. From the God's point of view, coming into matter, because we have fallen deeper into matter than was intended, if there is an incarnation of an avatar or something like that coming down into the material, the whole soul nature is stretched. It's more like a Procrustean stretch than it is like a divine stretch. And clearly, this is the other meaning of Titanic. We've talked about it for a number of times over the last few years. The other name for the Titans was what we call the Lucifer spirits. And the Lucifer spirits are the ones, they were the red ones like Typhon, that led us down into deep into the material world. So we had our fall into matter, so that now, because we're so materialistic, we're in danger of stretching our consciousness, our whole soul, to the breaking point with our materialism, so that the spirit can't follow down into this. So the stretching and the Timetic mouth of the Nile represents that. Now, all of this action happened on the 17th day of Athyr, when the sun passes through Scorpio, and it happened in the 28th year of Osiris, of the reign of Osiris. He started reigning as soon as he was born. So we have just 2 symbols to go, and we're going to make it in 90 minutes. All deaths, the big death and the little death of initiation and the dying, are indicated by Scorpio. It represents the gates of life and death. It represents the death of the physical, so that one can enter into the resurrection of Sagittarius and into those higher spiritual realms, up to the land of the gods. So the Scorpio is involved with the whole process of transmutation. It's involved with the whole process of death and dying and going to higher levels. So that part is pretty clear cut. But the 17th day is a very subtle coding. The 17th day happens between the 16th day and the 18th day. And that has to do with something extremely Pythagorean. There are perfect figures, or representative figures. And one of those figures, there are all kinds of squares, but the square that is 4 by 4 is a perfect square to the Pythagoreans, because 4 times 4 equals 16, and 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4 equals 16. There are almost, I think this is Sherrod can correct me if I'm wrong, but there are no other squares where the perimeter equals the area. There are no other squares where the perimeter equals the area except the 4 square. And this represented to the Pythagoreans the perfect square. Because if a person was outside what they are inside, this was a perfect person, that the inner and the outer were perfectly attuned to each other. On the other hand, the 18 was the perfect rectangle. Because its perimeter is also equal to its area. And so the 17 then is between the 18 and the 16. Meaning to say these are both perfect figures because what they are inside is what they are outside. Each one of them represents a different kind of activity. The 4 square represents pure creation. It represents a balanced divine creation. The 18 square is the casket of Osiris. It is taken into the earth. It's a recumbent rectangle. It's laying flat like the bottom of the 3, 4, 5 triangle. It is the receptive material feminine masculine. And it is the rectangle that is, so what the 17th means is just another way of saying the same thing all over again. It's saying that the perfect